Hey everyone, this is David Donaldson with Van Dyke Mortgage. Today we've got a special guest, Denis Phillips, Chief Meteorologist with ABC Action News. And as we're entering the thick of it for hurricane season, I thought it'd be interesting to bring him on to share some of his thoughts. I know for me, it's been an incredibly hot summer. My electric bill is through the roof. I was excited about seeing that we're going to go into an El Nino year. Some people may not know what that is, and I'll let you kind of explain. But I'm not sure that's going to get offset by the heat we've had. So, what do you first starting off? Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
My
And
pleasure, David. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Yeah, we're just try to have a conversation and answer some questions that might be interesting for folks. So, what about the heat we've got out there and how that might offset El Nino effects?
Well, first of all, and I can get into this. Actually, why don't I go ahead and do this now because it kind of makes sense if we're talking about El Nino. I've got access to my weather computer at work, and this is what El Nino is. So what you do is you have this area of warm water off the coast of South America. You can kind of see it right there. And typically, whenever you get this kind of a pattern, it often leads to a less active hurricane season for the Atlantic, more active for Pacific. And, unfortunately, that was what was going on with Hawaii when they had all those devastating fires in Maui. The outward edge of a tropical system, Hurricane Dora, actually was responsible for that. But what happens, interestingly enough, is even though it often leads to a hotter summer for us, many times it also leads to a stormier winter for the Southeast. So when you look at our upcoming winter, you often see wetter than normal rainfall potential in the wintertime. And also severe storms are a little more frequent. You see those little red arrows down there. That's the subtropical jet stream. So when that jet comes over Florida in the wintertime, it often leads to stronger storms. But in the summertime, what can often happen is those same upper level winds often cut the tops off of developing storms. In other words, as a hurricane is trying to develop, it has to have upward growth into the sky, kind of like what our clouds do in the afternoon in the summertime. You see them go up and up and up. The higher they get, the stronger our thunderstorms. Well, when a hurricane's trying to develop, it goes through the same process. But when you have these upper level winds that cut the tops off of those, it quite often leads to a less than active season. But sometimes, unfortunately, that less than active season can lead to stronger storms. So when you look at August, September, and October, we are now, as you mentioned, getting into the heart of the season, kind of prime time. And typically we peak September 10th. Historically, that's been the peak of the hurricane season. But in Florida, and I think a lot of Floridians know this, we kind of have to keep our eyes on what's going on in the month of October. And if you look at the map here in terms of frequency, there's a little uptick in the middle of October. You see that? Well, that
Yeah.
is almost always a Gulf of Mexico storms. Matter of fact, the last major hurricane to hit the Bay Area, it's been over 100 years. And that was October 20th, 1921. So, yeah, even though the season gets ramped up the second half of August, all of September, even October, the Gulf of Mexico has to watch out for that possibility as we go into October. So that's something to keep in mind.
So that's I was encouraged when I saw the El Nino year that we would have, less hurricanes. That's always great. Help our insurance policies. I hope that is really, affecting, our clientele with them buying houses and the insurance. But then, I saw on the news the other day there was some reading off of Key West. The water temperature was 100 or 101, which is not good for the coral reefs or anything. But warmer waters fuel hurricanes. So we've got El Nino and warm waters. What's that going to look like?
Well, that's a really interesting point. And honestly, that has led to a lot of discussion about climate change and how climate change may or may not be impacting the state of Florida or the world for that matter. And I'll tell you, I have a pretty solid opinion on this. Yes, we had the water temperature it was Manatee Bay, it was about 101 down in the Keys, and there is some coral bleaching going on, quite a bit of it for that matter. But in reality, the kind of heat in an area like that, that was not specifically climate change that caused that. The heat that you talked about, here's what's going on. While we have been excessively hot, the east coast of the US has been cooler than average and rainier than average this summer. That's why we haven't had as much rain as we usually do, because we've had a big old trough of low pressure on the eastern third of the US. It's given them rain. For us, it gave us a west wind. Well, west wind is not what we usually see in the summertime. We usually get an easterly wind from the Bermuda High, right? So a westerly wind has a tendency to bring most of the rain to the east coast. So we've been hotter than normal. We've been drier than normal, not because of climate change, it's because of this trough on the eastern third of the US. So what's happened is because there's been more sunlight, there's been less rain, there's more heating with that sunlight. And in an area like Manatee Bay, which is a very shallow area of water with a lot of grass and stuff in it, what absorbs the heat. So we've had unusually hot temperatures. So yes, the answer to your question is warmer water will typically increase hurricane activity. The water right now in the Gulf is 90, 93 in the Bay. It's usually 89, 90, 91 this time of the year. So there's been a lot of talk about excessive heat. And in some cases that has been true, but that's not to say it is a permanent thing. And this year, it is something we're dealing with. And certainly the development out in the far Atlantic will increase faster if the water is warmer. Really clear about that, including the Gulf of Mexico as well.
But it doesn't sound like it doesn't sound like it's going to make that much of a difference with a hurricane or the strength of it. It's the water's a couple degrees warmer than normal.
True, but I mean, 2 degrees warmer is a lot in terms of meteorology. So I mean, my point was just this does not mean it's going to be like this forever and ever from now on, which is what a lot of people are saying. And it's lazy journalism and lazy science for that matter. But I mean, it's just there's so many other smaller things that are going on right now. And the easy thing is, well, it's going on because of climate change. So climate change is going on, and there are things that we're dealing with, and we don't know what's going to happen 50 years down the road, no matter what anybody says. But at the end of the day, these short-term fluctuations do have an impact, and we are absolutely 1.5 degrees higher than what we should be in the Atlantic. Well, not that we should be, what we usually are. And that 1.5 degrees can be a big difference. It really can. So the answer to that question is, yeah, it doesn't mean there's going to be more storms. That doesn't have any impact on that. But it certainly could lead to stronger storms, at least in the short term, until the water has a tendency to even itself out, which inevitably it will. Next year, we could easily be. Last year, we were 1 degree below average. So for the people who are saying this is a permanent thing, look, things don't fluctuate like that if it's permanent. They fluctuate because it's weather. And at the end of the day, there is warm water out there, and that warm water does fuel hurricanes. It absolutely does. So I would be concerned in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, we don't want to date this particular Zoom, but there's action going on out there, and there's a legitimate chance we have a named storm or even a hurricane pretty close to Florida a week. Not even that, 5 days from today. So that's what's going on out there right now.
Right. So, the last two major threats that we've had for the Tampa Bay area, and I got caught in the first one where it's going to go up the east coast of Florida, it's going to go over Miami, it's going to come up the center of the state. Hey, it's coming straight at you, and that was very uncomfortable because I felt trapped. First of all, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know if there was going to be gas on the road to even try to get there, and so you're hunkering down. And as I recall, that moved from the east coast to coming straight at us within 36 hours or something. I mean, it was rather quick. So with that, I mean, what do you do? What do you recommend for your family as to, hey, you know what, you don't have to go far, but you probably need to get off of the coast. And we're on the coast.
Correct. You hide from the wind, you run from the water. That is bottom line. That is the expression of all expressions with hurricanes. You'll probably ride most storms out even near the coast if you don't evacuate because of flooding. The situation that you talked about, by the way, it was the ice storm, Irma and Ian, both times. Ivan was a beast. This one in the Gulf that we're probably going to see next week will be an ice storm. It'll be a Dahlia. I'm not saying that there's any relationship to it other than the ice storm is usually close to the peak of hurricane season. So it kind of works out that way. But yeah, But I will tell you, and you bring up a good point, and it's one I talk about all the time. Look, Florida is a very narrow state, 100 miles across, right? Or whatever it is, 120 miles across. When a storm that's coming in from the south, either through the straits between Cuba and Florida, or the Keys in Florida, the mainland, or the Yucatan coming in from the Caribbean. Imagine you have there's only maybe a 15-mile swing, because imagine you have your car, you're driving your car and you have your steering wheel and you're down in the Keys and you just turn your steering wheel just a smidge in either direction, that much. Well, in 10 miles, you're not going to be, your movement won't be that much of a difference. But in 100 or 150 miles, it's literally the difference from the East Coast in the Atlantic or the West Coast in Florida. We will never be able to tell anyone a storm coming in that's making a hard turn, like Charlie did, like Ian did, like Irma did. We are never going to, because here's the problem. A 15-mile difference in a track in the Keys or in Cuba is literally the difference between an Atlantic storm or a Gulf storm. 15 miles. The models will never be that good. Never. So I tell people, if a storm's coming in from the Atlantic side, we know we're going to be okay here because we're not going to get any water. If it comes in from the south, from the Caribbean, between Cuba and the Yucatan, and moves due north, you know the storms, right? Well, they want to go north. They want to hit the panhandle. Storms go poleward. That's where they're drawn. So what would cause a storm to skew from its straight line north and into Florida? A front. Well, how many fronts do we get in July or August? Not too many. But as we get into September and October, we have a tendency to get more. But Ian was a perfect example. Ian came in from the Straits and hooked hard right. Okay, that can happen from time to time. But when you're having such a huge angle of turn, when it's down south of us in the Keys, it's impossible to predict where it's going to go until it actually makes that turn. So Irma was the same way. It's called a windshield wiper effect. Drove me crazy. The models, one run, east side. Next run, west side. People are like, what the heck's your problem? How come you can't tell the difference from the East Coast to the West Coast? And my answer is because it's literally a 10-mile difference. Where that storm is right then, if it's 10 miles to the right, it goes Atlantic. If it's 10 miles to the left, it goes Gulf. That's never going to get better. We will never be able to be so accurate that we can predict a 10-mile difference 3 or 4 days out. So unfortunately, the reality we dealt with Ian and Irma, anytime a storm comes in from that direction, the entire west coast of Florida should be in the cone. We cannot pin, and that happened with Ian. Started in Tallahassee, went to the Big Bend, went to Tampa, ended up in Fort Myers. Pretty much the entire west coast of Florida was under the gun at some point. And in my opinion, any storm coming in from that same direction, it's going to always be that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I've lived in Florida all my life. I have my own rule. Category 1, 2, 3, hunker down. Category 4, you may want to get out of the way. But what you're saying is, seek shelter in your house in the wind. It may blow a tree down or tear the roof off, but we'll get through it. It's certainly stressful to hear that whooshing sound going on for hours and hours. We've been through them, but your main concern is more of rising water and flood, because that'll flat out knock houses off the foundation. People could drown. Certainly Katrina in New Orleans, it was a water event that did the devastation there.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the biggest concern with the Bay Area's EOC folks is everybody gets out on the road and they can't get off the road. The bridges shut down. I mean, out of Pinellas County, how many ways are out of Pinellas? Not too many. And 3 of them are bridges. So all of a sudden you get these people who wait till 36 hours, 24 hours out, and they're like, oh my God. And that's worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is you've got a 1, a tropical storm, or a 1, maybe a strong 1, minimal 2, and people are going to ride it out. They're like, well, okay, we can handle that. And overnight it goes from a 1 to a 5. And it happens. It happened with Michael. It happened with Opal back in the mid 90s. Now that hit the panhandle. I was doing the morning show. I went to bed. It was a tropical storm, minimal Cat 1 hurricane. I woke up 5 hours later. It was a Cat 4. And that's the worst case scenario for the people along the coast, because at that point, it's too late for you to get out, because everybody's going to try to get out, and they'll either shut down the bridges or there'll be accidents. I chased Hurricane Rita back in 05 in Texas, and the main interstate was literally shut down because everybody was trying to get out and they couldn't. So people were sitting on their cars, just sitting there because they had nowhere to go. So emergency management folks would rather you be in your home, at least safe, than trying to be out on the road and being stuck. And you don't have to evacuate hundreds of miles away. Like you mentioned, sometimes it's just a matter of going into our inland counties, Eastern Pasco, Eastern Hillsborough. I mean, areas that you're just not going to see the full effects of the water. But as you mentioned, if it's a 4 or a 5, all bets are off at that point. It isn't just hide from the wind, run from the water. It's get out of Dodge. Because when you got a 4 or a 5, that will destroy. You'll get structural damage with a 3, but a 4 or a 5, you're really going to see issues. So that's what we tell people. Look, and usually, again, worst case scenario is that 1 to a 5 in 12 hours, like it happened with Michael. But the majority of the time, you're going to have enough notice to know, hey, should I get out? Should I not get out? Although, remember with Ian, remember all the traffic jams, remember the gas stations were closed, remember people couldn't get out of here. And that's a real concern for emergency management folks, and people will be stuck out on the roads. And that's why flood zones have changed. A lot of flood zones have changed lately, and it isn't because there's some meteorological phenomenon that makes you more or less likely to flood. They're changing because the folks realize with reason that we would rather you be home riding this storm out than adding to the traffic and congestion of the folks who are trying to get out and can't, and will be stuck in the middle of a storm in their car.
Yeah, that would not be a good place to be at all. So, it sounds like if you're concerned or you're the stress of it all, just go 50 miles and find a hotel.
Yep.
And do that 48 hours. Don't wait till 24 hours.
Well, and here's what I do. You asked me what I do. Here's what I do. So typically a week out, you're going to hear some buzz about a storm. We have one right now. We've got some buzz for a week from right now, not even 6 days. Odds are it won't turn into that storm, but I'm talking more about ones that come in from the Caribbean or way out in the Atlantic, and it's coming. It's a 3 a week before it even comes near Florida. So what I do is, if there is a storm that's a 3 or higher, or forecast to be a 3 or higher shortly, I will go on whatever website allows me to do this, where it doesn't charge my credit card up front, and it allows me to cancel within 24 hours of your reservation. And I will book a week to 10 days for my family. And the one that I use that lets me do it is Hilton.com. And you can literally go on and you can make a reservation with a credit card, but it doesn't even charge your credit card. Because if you're going to charge 2 weeks of some people don't have the means to
Right.
afford 2 weeks hotel, not tens, but several $1,000s on your hotel. But they just verify your credit card. They don't charge. And then just within 24 hours before, you can cancel, and you're not charged a thing. You just got to remember to cancel, or they will charge.
Right.
But to me, that's, and like you said, it can be in Orlando. It could be in Polk County. We got caught with Ian. With Irma rather. I didn't do that. And I usually do, and I just forgot about it or whatever. And the closest hotel my family could find was Atlanta. So they drove to Atlanta to get out of the way of Irma. But it's a really good thing. A week out, people aren't doing it yet. And again, you can cancel your reservation. It doesn't cost you a thing. And it's certainly peace of mind to know that you're going to have a place to go, especially, again, if you're right on the coast or very near the coast.
Right. So that's great information. I'll take that advice. So you get a strong category 2, 3 hurricane 5 days out. Go ahead and book something in case you need to maneuver. Cancel it if you don't, just to be kind of safe. I've got elderly parents, so the last storm that came in, I've got them all here at my house because they were in evacuation flood zones. And it was I told my wife, Bobby, but hey, next time we're going to get out of here. I just don't want to deal
Yeah.
with that anymore
Yeah.
because it is stressful.
The in terms of how and I'm not just saying any Cat 3 or 4 storm out there. I'm saying a Cat 3 or 4 storm out there that within the 5 or 7 day track that the Hurricane Center has is going to hit Florida.
Yeah.
And and not even the West Coast, not even the East Coast of Florida, probably just the West Coast, because you all know an East Coast storm is not the kind of storm we're going to evacuate here. Even if
Right.
it goes
Right.
across the state, well, we might get 70, 75, 80-mile-an-hour winds. It happened with Gene and Francis back in 04. That's not the kind of stuff you would evacuate for. So again, a 3, 4, or 5, where that track up to 7 days out has it coming somewhere on the West Coast of Florida. At that point, that's when I make those arrangements.
So tell me more about your rules. You've got a rule number 7. What's that? What's that?
So back in 2012, Hurricane Isaac, the RNC, the Republican National Convention, was in Tampa.
I remember.
And we had a hurricane come in, Hurricane Isaac, right as the RNC was supposed to start. And people were freaking out. And I'm like, no, it's going to be okay. And they're just freaking out. So I literally jotted down these 7 rules. It took me 5 minutes. There was nothing to it. I just, these rules. And number 7 was don't freak out unless I'm freaking out. We're fine. Now, I was referring to Isaac, that particular storm. But that mantra has kind of taken on a life of its own. I mean, we have this thing going on in the Caribbean right now, and I'm seeing rule number 7 everywhere. And not to mention all my posts on Facebook, if I don't write rule number 7, people think, oh my God, it's time to freak out now. Dennis is freaking out. So, but the point of that now, and it's actually turned into a really nice fundraiser for us for Children's Miracle Network. And we have rule number 7. Well,
yep, I see it. That's a great hat. I want one.
so we have hats, we have sweatshirts, we have tees, we have all this stuff, and then we also, my wife makes tumblers and water bottles and whatnot with the logo. So I mean, it's turned into this little small business thing going, and the point of it is, and even though it meant it was only with Isaac, my take is, look, how are you going to make decisions for your family's well-being if you're freaking out? You got to take a breath. You got to decide. And this is why it's so important to do everything in advance. Because I get it. If it's 24, 36, 48 hours out and you see a Cat 4 storm coming this way, you're probably going to be freaking out and you might not be thinking the way you need to be. So you need to do all these preps beforehand. I mean, especially within insurance, the most important thing for your stuff is to go around and get a really explicit video on every single thing that you have in your home, all your videos of all your jewelry, all your valuables, whatever, and you keep that in the cloud so it will always be there. Because if, God forbid, you happen to get hit hard and you lose a lot, you got to have that kind of stuff. So rule number 7 is designed, again, that one particular storm, but I still believe it's valid. When a storm is coming, you got to have your head screwed on straight or you're not going to make the best decisions for your family. And that's kind of what we try to preach, avoiding hype as much as we possibly can. Because I know people are freaked out by a storm as it is. They certainly don't need the weather guy saying, oh, we're going to die, you better run. And there are some people out there like that. So we try to go the opposite direction. Because in my opinion, a lot of especially on social media, a lot of people love to show worst case scenario because that's the sexiest video to show. That's the one that's going to get clicks. That's the one that's going to get likes because people are obsessed with, a storm coming in. So there's usually a worst case scenario and there's usually a best case scenario. And we all know it's usually somewhere in between. So why would you focus on the worst case scenario when the majority of the time it's not going to happen? It doesn't make sense. To me, all it does is people might watch 1 or 2 times, but then afterwards they realize you're wrong again. They're going to stop trusting you. So my take is kind of more, look, over the long run, you build some trust and then people might come to you and trust you when a storm is coming. And that's my take. And by avoiding hype and avoiding freaking out, that's a really good start.
Yeah, you said that saying took off. I mean, there's a local brewery here that made a beer. You've got a beer named after you, or at least your rule. I mean, that's pretty special.
It's a Crooked Thumb out of Safety Harbor, and it was actually after Irma. They liked the coverage. They felt safe by watching, and so they dedicated a pale ale. Well, at first year it was a Hurricane Saison, which I thought was a pretty neat deal. But they have the cans with suspenders on them, and and it's and they donate part of those proceeds for the Red Cross hurricane relief. So yeah, it's a flattering thing, and it's really been a valuable lesson for me because I've learned, I don't know, I learned this maybe after Irma, maybe even after Charlie back in '04. I used to think that my job was just getting the weather right. That's all it was. My job was to get the weather right, and whatever happens, happens. And I realized as I got older and as I saw storms impact people, that my job is probably more holding people by the hand and getting them through a storm as opposed to just getting the weather right. It's probably both. But I really feel my responsibility is to ease people through because the majority of the time, we're going to be okay in the Bay Area. Again, knock on wood, and it's going to happen at some point, but it's been over 100 years since we have had a major hurricane hit the Bay Area. That's got to tell you something. Either the Indian burial grounds are working, or maybe we are not in an area that is quite as prone to a major hurricane as, say, the Panhandle. And that is absolutely true. Because as I mentioned earlier, storms coming in from the south, which is our worst case scenario, want to go due north. So they're more likely to go to the Panhandle than they are to the west central part of Florida.
Yeah, that's why they call it Hurricane Alley. Yeah, I would never live up there just because it seems to be, a magnet, and the hype that comes with these storms. We've got a lot of clients that are new to Florida. We've had a lot of people move into our great state, and they don't know how to deal with hurricanes. And I think, trying to drown out some of the noise that's out there is good. I have a retired firefighter that's a friend of mine who lives in my neighborhood. So he's walking around. He's like, "Hey, how's it going?" I said, "Well, I'm a little bit concerned." He's like, "Why? You think you're going to die?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I was thinking about a tornado coming down the street, and maybe I put my family in jeopardy because we didn't leave, and now it's a Category 4 coming at us." And so anyway, I think trying to drown out some of that noise is definitely, good advice, and listening to somebody like yourself. I know you've got a lot of followers. How do some people who don't follow you? How do they do that?
Well, I just expanded my platform this last weekend. I've never been a TikTok guy, but I've found that people who are a little older prefer Facebook, and people who are a little younger prefer TikTok. And my take was I wanted to get my message on as many places as I can. So what I've done is I opened up a YouTube channel, a TikTok page, and I'm still on Facebook, and I'm still on Twitter/X. So if you go on TikTok or YouTube, you'll see, just look for Denis Phillips Weather, one N in Dennis, Denis Phillips Weather. And same thing for TikTok, and same thing for Twitter, X, Facebook. You just search Denis Phillips, and I'll show up. And I really, and this shows you how what I do for a living has changed. 10 years ago, 99% of the people who came up to me would say, "I watch you on TV." Now, not exaggerating, 99% of the people say, "I follow you on Facebook." So people get their weather information in very different ways than they used to. Now, when there's a storm coming, they watch both. And we've found that, whenever there's a hurricane coming, the ratings skyrocket because people will tune in for that weather information. But the difference with me from a lot of folks is I post 24/7 when a storm is coming. I post probably too much. But my take is I always want people to have more information than not enough. I'd rather them have too much than too little. So yeah, on TikTok, it's Denis Phillips Weather. On YouTube, it's Denis Phillips Weather. On Facebook, it's Denis Phillips, and I update 24/7. Even if you don't watch TV or you watch someone else, I've said this for a long time. We have a lot of really good weather people in the Bay Area. I know them all personally, and they're all good people. So at this point, when a hurricane's coming, look, I don't care where people watch. Sure, I'd love them to watch me, but I want you to go to somebody that you trust, someone that you've built some trust with over the years. Because I think what does happen is people go on social media, and you get people who are far more aggressive and more hyping things to try to get views and to try to get likes and to try to get clicks. And then and what happens is we get flooded with messages from people saying, "Well, I was on Facebook and I saw somebody say," well, "who was that person?" "Well, I don't know, but they said last week this woman went on TikTok and was screaming there was going to be a Cat 6 hurricane that was going to hit Florida. And everybody, and literally this got millions of views, this video. And I cannot tell you how many messages I got. Oh my God, are we going to get a Cat 6 hurricane? I'm like, no, there's no such thing. And even if
I
there
was
was,
about to
you're not going
say.
to get it. But the point is, it's out there. So pick the source that you trust, that you feel comfortable with, and stick with them, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this has been very educational, for somebody who's been through hurricanes. I love the idea of trying to book something 5, 6 days, out. It's good reminder that you can hide from the wind, but you better run from that water. And yeah, I know you and I had a conversation last year. That's how we got to know each other. I'll put a little plug there for the Gasparilla Festival of Arts, but my wife and stepson have been involved in that for years, and they brought you on board several years ago. And we're sitting around talking, and you're like, we haven't been hitting 100 years. I'm like, Dennis, stop. don't mess with the Indian burial ground. Just leave
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah, there's people who say never use the Q word. Never say quiet when you're talking about the tropics, because it'll come back and bite you in the butt. So I'm not a superstitious guy, so I don't know. But at the end of the day, it is going to be very active for the next 6 to 8 weeks. So hopefully we can dodge some more bullets.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I appreciate you coming on board and giving us this information. Again, for everyone out there, if you need me, you can go to SouthTampaMortgage.com. My cell phone's 813-230-3433. And everybody stay safe. And we got some good information. Thank you so much, Dennis.
My
Appreciate it.
pleasure, Dave. Take care.
All right. Have a good day.